We actually both work in the same project under Screenplay.io right now. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, definitely check us out on our Facebook, Twitter, and our Medium for the eSport articles we write. So let's jump straight into what we're going to talk about today. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about eSport franchising, why it's important, how it's been growing so far from back in the dark ages, which was about 2002, 2003 until now. We'll also give a little bit of take on the virtual reality since GDC just happened. We want to give a little bit of take on how we think about virtual reality, how other gaming companies think about virtual reality. So yeah, let's jump straight into esports franchising. I want to go from the beginning because it'll be really hard to kind of get the point across if you don't understand the history behind esports. So back in the dark ages of esports, which is about 2003, 2004 in South Korea, where first esport teams were really formed for StarCraft Brood War, the game itself, as a competitive esport game. Typically, these kind of companies were formed, these teams were formed actually by the companies of South Korea. So a few big examples, Samsung sponsored a team called Samsung Con. SK Telecom calls themselves SKT. You probably heard this team more than anything else because they've been around and the League of Legends team is the best team in the whole world right now. There's also other teams like Jin Air is Korean airline. There's a few other teams here and there formed based on company interest. So going back from that point on to more of the modern day period where we can compare to teams like TSM, Cloud9, Evil Geniuses, Alliance. Those are the pretty big, well-known teams here. Even the team that I was on before is called Fnatic. It's one of the biggest franchises in Europe right now, not necessarily very big in America. And so you can see kind of a revolutionary trend here that started off in the dark ages where companies start sponsoring teams into just guys that want to play games together. Essentially, I feel like the teams that were formed nowadays, the franchises that the players are, there's a group of players that are pretty good together. Maybe they formed a team that's really well known for a certain game. A really good example is Tempo Storm, right? They all play Hearthstone mainly. They started off as Hearthstone. They kind of branched out into CS:GO. They start branching out to Melee and so forth. So it's a bunch of people that are popular, famous, does well in a certain game. They come together, form a team, and then they try to franchise it after to branch it out to different games. One thing I do definitely see though is that the history of coming through from team to team. The franchising part is probably the toughest part for a esport team itself. And I understand, like I've been on 3 or 4 teams that have collapsed halfway through just because some players could not perform or their market strategy wasn't really good. They didn't have enough funds and so forth. So there's a lot of difficulties when it comes to franchising esports. And I kind of want to bring it back up to the modern days. It's you kind of see a revolution here where if it used to be companies focusing on teams sponsoring different players to play under their banners and to players organizing themselves to make teams. TSM is a really big and good example. It's really big right now. I think Crip is one of the Hearthstone streamers for TSM, even though he's not a competitive player. It's part of the franchising strategies that esports teams are taking. And right now, we're talking a little about TSM, and it's actually coming back a little bit to the companies, gaming companies that are sponsoring teams. So like, there's Team Alienware, I think. There was a TT Esports team. There's Team Razor for sure, and there's a lot of other teams that are sponsored by specific companies. But these companies, their product are a lot more gamer focused compared to what is back in the days in Korea, which is just anything that any company basically that wants to sponsor a team.
Yeah, so it's there's been a massive step forward from what it was like in the future. I mean, nowadays though, you still have groups of players coming together that really like a certain game. They've known each other for a long time and they played at the highest level, but do again want to go and be more competitive, and they start out by forming a team. And then they end up looking for a manager if they deem that is necessary. And a lot of the time it is very necessary. And what they look for in the manager is administrative help, helping them book flights, look for events to participate in, get motivational support. And a lot of the time the manager could also choose to step in to help finance a lot of these things. So it's a two-way street. But also, rather than players going to form the team and looking for managers, there's also managers and independent managers wanting to kind of host and have their own team. So these managers, they go out and look for the players. They pick players that are top in the game and mix players together that have a good match. But not only are companies and looking for players to form teams for games, they're also looking for other aspects, like you mentioned before with Crip streaming for TSM, because this is also a massive way to help them. It opens up a new revenue stream for the company, and also it gets exposure out, because these streamers, even if they're not professional competitive players, they have a massive amount of exposure for the team brand. And also, in addition to the team brand itself, the team brand could be sponsored by third-party companies, which are all gaming related or computing related. So these sponsors could put their brand on the with the TSM brand on the streamer's platform. And these streamers are probably going for, I would say, at least 6 hours minimum per day, up to 10, 12 hours of streaming a day. And on top of that, they maybe produce their own videos on YouTube. So not only Twitch streaming, they're also doing videos on YouTube. And not only is the TSM brand, which is actually the main reason for them having these streamers, they're probably also able to get another third-party company's brand onto the streamer's platform. So this is a massive portal to build popularity and brand awareness for the competitive team, but also at the same time have a potential stream for revenue.
Yeah, I want to take a little step back and talk about, you mentioned a little bit about sponsors, third-party sponsorship. So a lot of these teams nowadays, like how I mentioned earlier, is that they're basically sponsored by players. They're started by players. So the way they make money, instead of those falling back to the big companies like Samsung, which can probably drop a few $1 million very easily to sponsor a team, these guys have to get the fame, they have to get the following, they have to go out to find sponsors to support their team itself. So what is the best way to find sponsors? What is the best way to generate revenue from your sponsors, right? Typically, these teams, they find certain sponsors that can pay out really well. It benefits both parties for sure. They find these sponsors, put their logos on their streams, on their jerseys, does articles, write articles, make videos about them. But the ultimate goal is to generate as much revenue as you can for your players and your team brand, the franchise itself. So similar to, I would say, basketball, there's a lot of sponsors. Wells Fargo, there's a lot of Chinese companies that sponsors different NBA arenas that are specifically for the team itself. There's a lot of sponsors that, like you mentioned, third parties that are focused on gaming or things that gamers will like. So maybe like Monster Energy, Red Bull, those are the pretty big ones that will sponsor different teams. So the best way for teams to establish their franchise and get more money from their sponsors to try to get as much reach as they can. So signing a big streamer might cost a lot. Maybe it cost them $20,000-$30,000 a month fairly easily, right? Mm-hmm. Costing this much, but the return to the bargain power they get from their sponsors is quite big. So we see there's a need and want to grow your brand as much as you can as a team that's not focused on, that's not sponsored directly by a company or made directly by a company. You have to force yourself to get as much reach and views as you can so that in return, your sponsors come back and give you a lot more money. So moving forward to talk about how esports is kind of evolving slowly. The teams are still evolving at this moment. I think there's some teams like Evil Geniuses. They're actually sponsored by a cable company called Xfinity. Mm-hmm. And that's a very big sponsorship there. Xfinity is probably one of the biggest cable services right now. So you do start to see a little bit of branching towards the mainstream product. Do you think that's because esports is becoming more mainstream, or do you think it's just more like a risk take, just give it a try, see how things go, and then fall back from there?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, because first of all, with the risk taking, a lot of companies are risk taking. They're not sure if the esports industry will blow up. It is expected to get up to around $1 billion by 2019. However, it's not a guaranteed success, and it's also not guaranteed on the brand side that their investment will pay off in the end, and that the content they give to the viewers is valuable for them, or that the viewers of the brand will, engage with whatever they're giving. So at the end of the day, it might not pay off. But at the same time, all these new companies coming in, I mean, even with SK Telecom, they're kind of all in the same market. All these telecommunication companies, all these massive computing companies, all these, they have their own team, but at the same time, they're starting to sponsor other teams as well. So with another company already doing that, having done this for a long time, I can see why they would try to, I wouldn't say copycat another company that's been doing this, but also give it a try and see how it goes.
Right. So I want to take a little bit step back and talk actually more about the mainstream part of eSport. We kind of mentioned a lot about how a lot of companies are trying. There's actually a lot of people in the current sport industry, like Shaq O'Neal is a big one. In music industry, there's I think Steve Aoki, one of the EDM DJs, he's been getting into esports. Jeremy Lin's involved in the esports as well. I think one of the basketball team, like the 76ers, I think, is also part of involved in directly buying the esport team. So we see a big trend where people are beginning to be more accepting of esport, kind of similar to how South Korea was from the very beginning, where it was the mainstream stuff from the beginning, so that it never was about selling a mouse. It never was really about selling a keyboard. It's about establishing your brand itself towards the whole audience of the community. And I feel like esports is moving towards that direction. And let's talk about how there was actually a specific case recently by the owner and the CEO of Cloud9, Jack. He's actually, in his interview recently, he said that basically esport competitors themselves have a very hard time to attend school because, one, you have to basically practice 10 to 12 hours per day to be competitive in the first place. And also a lot of them, when they're young, around the age of 18, even age of 16, they start playing a lot of video games and they have to forego school and so forth. So a lot of them, she cannot attend universities. And what Jack is trying to do is actually try to strike a deal with all the Californian schools in the southern part of California, so that his players can have a choice of going back to school as they need to. And I feel like this is particularly important because esports is still quite young. You see in current professional sports, in let's say American football, you have to basically graduate from university or college before you can play in the NFL. I know in basketball you can play for 1 year in the college league before you can be picked up. So everything you have to do is you have to have like barely at least a college, some sort of college or university level of work before you can go. And how is that important? It's becoming, again, esports is becoming more mainstream. People are caring more. People want, like, let's say accidentally your franchise like Cloud9, I'm not saying it's going to die, but let's theoretically say Cloud9 just disappears, or the game that you're competitive in, like the game I was competitive in, StarCraft 2, it just completely dies out. What do I do now, right? Like, how do I get into a different field? Maybe I can be a supportive side of esports, maybe on the production side and so forth, but how do I get to that point? And I feel like the esports offering that Jack is giving back to his players, to the community, is allowing him to do so.
Yeah, I think what Jack's doing is actually a massive step forward for the industry itself. I mean, if you look at how the US is with universities and also high school, you have already massive leagues for not only sports, but all kinds of, I would say, music and arts. You have all kinds of massive high school versus high school, university versus university competitions. University have the Ivy League. And once those players finish university and they're already top people in the Ivy League, they get handpicked onto further professional teams after they've done university. So I'm not saying that universities currently have a eSport competitive league such as the Ivy League that universities have in the US, but this could be the first step companies take, and they take towards having this kind of thing in the future. And it also does give, like you said, the player a massive advantage in life, I would say, because they do have to make a sacrifice whether they want to continue on this with their passion or if they want to go to university. And this is hard to choose between, especially at a younger age. And you were also saying how if suddenly a game dies or suddenly
your handbrakes. Like literally your handbrakes.
Yeah, handbrakes. That could happen. You could be injured and then you could not, the doctor say, okay, you can't play for months. The team, they would probably have to look for another player to replace you for the time being. Or if you have some kind of condition and you can't play for, say, over a year or 2 years, that can happen because esports is intensive at times. Say, even if a game dies, what do you do? Do you just switch to another game, or do you quit completely and go back to university, or you just get a normal job? That being said, you haven't gone to university in the past. So these are all massive questions and ifs. However, a lot of what is... I'm kind of moving on to a different topic, I think, but it's kind of related. With a lot of people in the gaming industry right now, say, if back in, say, Season 1, Season 2 of League of Legends, you had a lot of people, a lot of players, such as Snoopy, and other players even now, that have stopped playing competitively. And what they do a lot of the time is they probably stick in the industry but move on to other roles, such as tournament hosting, such as they might even have their own esports team. I think what was that player from TSM who did that? Reginald, I think? Yeah, Reginald. He was part of the team, and then he became the team manager. Snoopy, I think he did casting for a bit. And also, a lot of other players that were professional before in the esports industry, they became hosts of tournaments, they started having their own teams, they started becoming shoutcasters, and they did really well, but they want to remain in the industry. So as the industry evolves, the players are also going with it, which is a great thing for the industry itself, because they bring with it, they've been players, they've been shoutcasters, they've been tournament hosters, they've been managers. So all of this is experience, but within the industry itself, rather than bringing someone outside of the industry.
Right. So that's you talk a lot about how there's a lot of chances of coming back, but it kind of mentions a little bit about how basically esports is very unstable at the moment. I would say that the life expectancy of a professional career of esport of a player who plays esport is not very long. Maybe 5, 6 years, 7, 8, 9. That's pushing already very much. And as you mentioned. Essentially, you want to stay in the industry. You want to have the education to do so. But compared to normal basketball and then football, even American football, right? If you're injured, you're out, but you're still signed a contract for however many years. They will still pay you out regardless, and they will make sure that you don't do so. And with esports, it's kind of shaky. You might have a dislocated disc. You might get carpal tunnel. Your hands might just not work really well anymore. Maybe you got an accident, so forth. So. Again, I think this kind of highlights another problem of eSport right now, which is more on the instability side. As a personal as a professional gamer in the past, I've met so many people that drop out of high school to pursue their dream. Essentially, everybody wants to pursue their dream, right? Mm-hmm. But how many people can actually succeed? That's a different story. So a lot of people are forcibly drop out of school because eSports is not recognized as a sport, so you can't actually practice after school as a team together to improve yourself. You have to do it yourself. You have to sacrifice time from school and so forth. So there's a lot of sacrifices to be made. And like you said, you talk a lot about the successful stories. What about those of us who didn't succeed, right? If you don't have a college degree, you don't have a high school degree, what now? Like, you can't get a job as a host. You're not charming enough. Your analysis is not as good. What do you do, right? So you don't want to be a McDonald's delivery person. And so I feel like this is more or less like insurance or backup for players like those who has failed or not necessarily failed to become the best, but who didn't make as far as some of the other players or their colleagues. So yeah, so again, esports slightly. I know we're going a little off topic from the original franchise topic, but yeah, I feel like esports, at least this is a good first step from Jack. He's more or less, I would say he's kind of a esport visionary in a sense where he sees problems of players that will have. It's not necessarily they can have. It's already happening, and a lot of players have dropped out. Some of the Chinese legendary Dota players, let's say, they opened up a internet cafe, not making money, right? They open up their own brand of selling keyboard and mouse, probably not making that much money either. So for those who didn't succeed, you have to educate them so that they can remain in the industry, be able to contribute to the industry itself and make esport very successful. All right, Simon. So with that said, let's have you wrap it up real quick and let us know what you think about esport franchise as a whole and how you think it will do in the future.
Well, there's actually a lot of interesting things about this, and all of this will happen in the future. Well, with big teams, I think the big teams will slowly get bigger if they're performing well. I mean, you're going to have big teams are going to get more investment, they're going to have more sponsorship, of course, because the sponsorships and the companies want to be associated with the big teams, like in every major sport there is out there. So they're going to get more money, they'll be able to bring in really, really good players. Because also with like the sponsors, the good players also want to be with the good teams. And if not bringing good players from other teams, they'll be able to get these good players that are fresh on the market that also want to be part of the famous teams that they watched before they came into the scene. So the big teams will slowly become more successful as time goes on. However, there's another side of this coin, which is the smaller teams. The smaller teams or the newer teams will have a hard time breaking into the scene. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible. It's because there's a lot of teams out there already, whether they're managed by an individual manager or a smaller company, or if they're a group of professional gamers wanting to break into the scene who do not have a manager yet. So they're a group of friends. These kinds of teams will have a harder time than the bigger companies because they're getting less sponsorship. They're not able to go to as many tournaments as the bigger teams. So they get less exposure. So it's going to be a hard time, but it's not going to be impossible, as you can see with probably one of the teams that did break into the scene pretty suddenly and with a bang would be Cloud9. There are other teams, but they probably all weren't as big as how Cloud9 broke into the team. It kind of surprised everyone in a way. They were doing well in many games at the time, winning many tournaments, and at the same time, with this rise to fame, they brought in a lot of sponsorship for the team. I'm not saying this was easy. It was just really sudden, and there must have been a lot of work and planning going to it. So, to sum up in one word, the big teams are going to get bigger, they're going to pull in more money, they're going to pull in more sponsorships, and at the same time, more companies are going to be wanting to kind of experiment and be associated with this new industry. While at the same time, there will be new teams coming in, new competition, but it will be hard for these new challengers to break in.
All right, so let's move on to the next topic, Simon. So we talk a little bit about how GDC is this week, and there's a lot of gaming announcements there about the new technology, the new things there, the next things that are coming out at GDC. One thing I did notice is that there was a lot about things talk about VR, all their new releases. Even Microsoft is moving, they're not really moving to a virtual reality store, but they have a online store that actually allows you to stream games from, and that actually hurt industries, retail industries like GameStop, for example. You can see their stocks has gone down. But let's focus more on VR. And Simon, would you want to give a take? Just let the audience know what it is and give your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. VR basically stands for virtual reality. What you can do with VR technology, you can play games, you can watch movies, you can pretty much do anything in by putting on a pair of, let's say, glasses that covers your head and your eyes, you enter into a world where there's endless possibilities inside a digital universe that you see through those glasses. And within that universe, you can interact with whatever software is developed. It could be a game or a movie, like I said before. So that's basically the technology. And there's a lot of companies investing in this industry. You have HTC with their HTC Vive VR headset. You have Oculus Rift. You also have companies like PlayStation. They have their own VR system. You have Xbox, which have their own VR system. They just recently announced alongside PlayStation. So they're all targeting different markets. There's console market, there's the PC market, and there's obviously also extracurricular other activities market.
Like porn industry, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, it's going to be a big industry, and roughly at the moment, it's around, I think, projected to be for 2017, $5 billion. And by, say, 2020, it's going to be around $35 to $40 billion industry. So from now until 2020, it's going to experience massive growth, mainly in the hardware sector. The hardware sector is currently, let's say 70% of where all the revenue comes from. But by 2020, it's going to probably be 50%, whereas the other 50% is going to be from consumer, such as games and what have you. So it's going to be a big industry, but personally, I don't see it becoming a mainstream thing. It's going to be a big thing, but it's not going to, let's say, replace console gaming or PC gaming or other things which are kind of in the same space or kind of overlap in terms of industry. It's not going to replace PC gaming as a mainstream or even mobile gaming or console gaming. But for it to become mainstream, it's going to be probably going to be at least another 5 to 10 years, I would say. At least.
Right. So, yeah, I could definitely agree with you a little bit more on just people, I think, overhyping VR personally. As a gamer for all my life, essentially since I was 3 or 4 years old, I've been playing games. So that's over 20 years. I've never, really liked the things that are coming out. I've been a PC gamer. I've been a console gamer. I went to the console first. And the big consoles, like back in the days. And then went to PC, went to Xbox, mobile, tried everything. I personally have never really stopped playing PC games. I've had everything, I've played everything competitively. But, for new things, new introduction, the way of playing games to come in and, say, become mainstream, I don't think that's necessarily possible at this point, just because the other markets are so saturated. See, I feel like if we're talking more about virtual reality, though, it's more of a style of gaming. We can't really say it can replace a certain sector. It would be more of maybe more popular in certain machines of playing. So let's say it might be more popular on the PC, for example, versus its counterparts on Nintendo's. Nintendo actually has a Switch, so they're developing their own thing, but essentially what I'm trying to say is virtual reality probably won't get very popular. It's getting overhyped. In the GDC itself, there's so many new quote-unquote VR-related items that us gamers don't really give a crap about. I don't see any good games. I don't see anything that's, wow, like this is so new technology, so real that I want to play it. No, I don't care. I just want to sit on my computer or sit in front of the TV and play with my friends or play by myself. I don't want to move around too much. Maybe it's just the fact that I don't want to adopt too much. But so far, VR hasn't really convinced me to be such a great thing that everybody needs, that everybody wants. And I feel like the reason as to why these companies are hyping it up so much, they're investing a lot into making games happen, invest into their own VR technology, is more or less like a gamble. You want to be the first. They want to gamble themselves so that they want to be the first guys that makes the best game on VR, the first best game in VR. I would say the first best game on Xbox is probably Halo, right? I don't know if anybody would disagree with that, but personally, when I first bought the Xbox, I bought Halo, and that was the best game of all time for me back in 2002, 2003. and it's still the franchised title of Xbox even now till nowadays. So it's I think companies are more or less trying to do that than let's say predicting the market of all of a sudden buying a bunch of VR gears and playing. And again, like you said, people VR is not going to be popular because one, it requires a lot of it requires a lot of specs from your hardware. So you have to have a really good computer, customized Xbox, I assume, and better PlayStation to even be able to run good VR. Not including that, you have to have a big room. You have to have the physical space to play VR because you do physically move around to play that game. So for a lot of families, it's a little difficult, especially if you have a lot of things around compared to staying in a small box and play on the PC. These kind of things these kind of problems will arise as we continue to look forward to VR. So again, is there truly a demand for VR? I don't really think so. Simon, do you have any just kind of insights on why do you think this kind of phenomenon is happening? What do gamers want, or what do people that are looking to VR want?
Well, personally, I think okay, we can take a step back and look at how the mobile industry evolved. Back, let's say, 10 years ago, and maybe even more, you had games such as Tetris, you had Snake on the mobile, and you had very simple, and then after that, you had probably very simple 2D car driving games, which I kind of worked on back in the day as an intern, in fact. And and that was 10 years ago. And look where we are today. Okay, we have games such as Clash Royale. So Clash Royale, Clash of Kings, Clash of Clans, whatever. So we have tons of mobile games now. But 10 years back, we did have mobile games, but they weren't as good. And what has allowed the games to come so far today and the industry to grow so much today is also because the technology of the mobile device has grown so much today, and the technology is able to now support mobile games. And we're kind of in the same area as for VR. I mean, the technology is very new. It's only been around for, I would say, in the market to the public for a few years. And the games for it are still pretty basic in the game mechanics itself. You probably have music games, you have a few horror games, but you're generally just walking around a room, tapping a few things, kind of feeling your bearings, maybe getting a few excitements, shooting a few things, but there's not really any complex mechanics. And then again, to bring it back to what mobile games were like, say 10 years ago, or maybe a bit more, VR games now are similar to complexity as mobile games were, say, 10 or more years ago. So we're going to have to see the technology develop a bit more. But at the same time, we also need to have the technology of the console and the PC to develop as well. Because to run a powerful VR game, or even what we have now, simple or not so complex VR games, you need a pretty good computer you need a top-notch PlayStation 4. And that being said, the PlayStation 4 graphics at the moment is capped because unlike PC, you're able to switch in things, get the newest technology, and that technology advance is much faster than PlayStation and Xbox technology, because PlayStation and Xbox technology only comes out a few years at a time. So we'll need to wait for the advancement of VR technology and also PC and console technology to be able to support the games that the players actually want. And like you said, it's probably just overhyped at the moment. So it's really, really hyped up. People like new stuff just because they just like new stuff. They're excited. They want to try it out. It's fresh. It's new. Their friends are playing it. Their families are, and they're being blasted with advertisements of new games. So there's a lot of hype. Players want to try new things, but it's quite a ways off. What I would really like to see, I'm pretty much a really big Dark Souls fan. A Dark Souls game in the VR would be incredibly complex to make, and this would probably take, I would say, 10 years off in the future for this game to be made in VR. So we're looking at quite a while for VR to become what we think it is in our heads.
Yeah, so I think so. You definitely mentioned a lot of good points there. So the overhype part, I definitely think so as well. Especially, I think it's more like a developer satisfaction to be able to work on something new. Like, as gamers, I really don't care about virtual reality. Again, the technology itself, like you said, it's not there. Um, Good comparison, especially it's similar comparison to how mobile is back in the days. The games right now, it's not exciting. The people that plays the games are probably not very excited. They probably just like new tech. It's kind of like similar to the people that just wants to buy only new Apple phones. Like they don't care about what kind of technology is in there. They just want to buy what is new, what is the best. And this kind of craze is actually pretty bad for the community. It's overhyping things, overselling things. Like an Oculus Rift is really expensive. Like these things are typically around $700-800, and if you don't have the good technology to use it, if you don't have the money, it's not meant for I personally don't think it's meant for everybody. It's meant for a small elitist group that can afford and has a hype towards this kind of high tech. So I would say it's definitely more about the developers are more excited to develop this kind of things to be the frontier. But like you said, the people that are making this now, 10 years later, they might just be out of their jobs because they're not up to date. It's going to be far more advanced. It'd be a lot better. It's a lot easier to play than ever. And again, there's some physical issues with Oculus or any sort of VR, is that you have to have a space. And a lot of families probably it's definitely not open for family of lower income. Like that's something that I can foresee that's a problem itself. Let's say you're living in a 300-400 square foot apartment. You probably don't have a lot of room to move around to play VR. You know, like the simplest games is probably just stand around clicking different things, pretend you're on a computer or something. I don't know, pretend you're flying, something like that. You know, I just think it's highly overly rated. It's still really new technology. It's similar to when Tesla came out. Nobody bought that Tesla. Well, because they don't have really good marketing strategies, but also it's really, really new. But with VR, it's completely different. It's that people are buying into a technology that is very premature. It's not ready for public use, and it's pretty simple. It's kind of crap. Like I don't like it. I don't see what the point of this is when you don't have any good games. And maybe that's probably why I think of this way, because whenever I try something new, let's say a mobile game, try only the good games like Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, Clash of King, King of Avalon, things like that. You know, these games are well developed enough for me to enjoy. They have enough story, they have enough mechanic for me to play, so I don't just get bored all of a sudden playing Snake all day. So I think one of the reasons why I don't like virtual reality is because there is no good game to prove that this will work. And until then, I personally wouldn't touch virtual reality. I think it's still way too young, and for the generation to catch up, it will take at least, like you said, 5 to 10 years to be able to buy these things more prevalently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't personally bought a VR headset yet. I've tried it on. I've tried one of my friends' VR headsets, and it's fun, but I'm not going to get one myself. Maybe when one of the big game companies come out, either console or PC, once they start making a VR game, which none have, not that I can think of. So once they start making a game, I'll probably consider buying a VR headset if there's some AAA games that I can enjoy. But yeah, moving to another side, what we've been talking before about was more the personal side. So you're in your own space, you're using VR by yourself. But what's happening around the world and now is that there's these companies that are hosting kind of VR venues and VR spaces for people to kind of go to and experience VR for themselves. So you have there's companies that kind of supply these little pods or spaces where you interact with an environment while wearing a VR headset, or you enter a pod with a VR headset, and you kind of get an experience where on a roller coaster you're battling aliens or something like that. So this is also something that's growing as an industry slowly rather than the personal use. Companies going out there and providing spaces for people with the technology, and all the person has to do is buy a ticket or purchase an hour slot and go and experience it with a group of friends. So that's also another direction that's pretty interesting and also has a lot of potential. Yeah. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so you definitely hit the spots with the new kind of pods and things like that for virtual reality. This kind of I mean, it's definitely a technological innovation. Like it's pretty out there, right? Like 10 years ago, we probably would never thought of being able to just wear a goggle and seize and interact in a game. You know, it's always the concept is always there, but they couldn't have imagined it. Definitely think it's a good way. It's a good step. I'm not sure if you ever saw the anime called Sword Art Online. It's basically where the characters, a person can load a similar thing to the virtual reality headsets, and then it actually goes directly into their brain synapses, and they can just interact while they're half asleep. Basically, their body don't move, but their brains move their characters within game or whatever they're doing. So I feel like this is like a really cool next step towards that direction. But again, I'm still a little skeptical about it just because I haven't seen the full capacity of virtual reality just yet. Like you said, maybe eventually the meetings will be all virtual reality. Maybe you have a presentation that's only virtual reality where a person will show all the slides, show all the pictures, show all the animations while everybody in the meeting is in a virtual reality set. And those would be like the kind of cool stuff that I want to see. But until then, I still think it's still a little too young. But within 5 to 10 years, I'm hoping that this will become an even much bigger industry, have a lot more utilities to it than what is given now, which is purely basically for entertainment purposes.
Oh, cool. I was just thinking about something that's kind of interesting. That's also related to what you were talking about just now, and also one of the topics we're talking about, which is hype. And so let's talk about some things that are cool about VR. I think one of the things why that makes VR pretty cool is, say, you put on a headset and all of a sudden, okay, you really like space. All of a sudden you're on Mars, or you're sitting at a table with an alien, maybe having breakfast. So there's so many possibilities that make it so cool. And whatever you can imagine, you can build yourself, or you can play a game that's built by someone else and you can go and experience whatever you want. And on that side, getting a little bit to the sciencey side, if you look at VR, you're not really doing anything else with your touch or anything or smell or anything. You're just seeing. And the thing with humans is how we perceive the world and the physical world how we perceive truth is we use our eyes to, it's our first instinct. So before we touch and smell and do anything else, our sight is our first point of determining what is real. And it's our first point of stimulus. So VR, it's in a way, once we put on a headset, we really believe or we really feel like we're somewhere else. I'm not saying it's that intense just yet, but it's massive.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's I think it's a pretty cool technology. Regardless of what I said so far, that I don't trust it, whatever. It's still really cool. It's new, technologically forwarding for basically the tech side. You know, it's crazy. We went from computers to virtual reality. Don't know what's going to happen next. So with that said, let's conclude today's podcast. I think it's been quite a good discussion, especially on the virtual reality. I think our opinions are fairly similar that it's not mature, it's too hyped. Mm-hmm. People will probably enjoy it in the next 5-10 years, but right now it's just kind of bogus, in my opinion. So yeah, again, with that said, we're going to conclude today's podcast. And again, thank you guys for tuning in, listening to our discussions. If you have any feedback, definitely let us know. And again, this podcast is brought to you by streamplay.io, and definitely check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Medium, and our website itself. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
See you guys.
See you.